Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm going to tell you about a very traumatizing thing that happened when my first son was born that affects me to this day and isn't easy to talk about. I thought for a long time that this is what caused my agoraphobia, the fear and the trauma from all this. But now I don't know if it did. And this is really something that I feel I should tell you all. And it may have affected, my whole agoraphobia and anxiety. But it's hard to pin down what the exact cause of my agoraphobia is. And one thing before I go on, big trigger warning. This story is not for anyone who's going through anything at the moment that's really hard, that they don't want to hear something like this. This is traumatizing and triggering and just really rough. So do not watch any further if you're not in a good place to handle this. I don't know what kind of emotions this is going to stir up talking about this, and just in case, I have a little bit of lavender to help give me some support. I thought I didn't want to do this video because it's going to be long and I'm going to go into a lot of detail, and I didn't want to put in the work and the effort of telling it all. But there may be more to it than that. I guess we'll see. So just a little bit of background with this story. I've never had any mental health problems to any severity before this event happened. I was just normal. I hadn't been diagnosed with bipolar disorder yet. I don't think I had it yet. If I had symptoms, they were relatively mild and they didn't affect my life very much. I did go to a psychiatrist when I was about 15 because I was struggling with depression, and they prescribed me some Prozac, but this depression was situational, and as soon as I was out of that situation, it vanished. I never took the Prozac either, which in hindsight I realized may have been a good idea because mood stabilizers probably would have been better because, in the future I had bipolar disorder. And antidepressants can occasionally upset brain chemistry and cause manic episodes. Anyway, also to give some background about the hospital situation, I had never been to a hospital except when I was 4 years old when I broke my arm. And I didn't have my babies in the hospital. I had them at home, and I didn't really know what hospitals were like all that much. And I had never been to a doctor either, really, because I'm a very healthy person and I eat a very healthy diet and take supplements and take good care of my health. So what happened was I'd had my baby at home, my first baby, and I was of course so excited. Here is what he looked like when he was little. And everything was great for 4 months. And 4 months later, something happened. It's hard to describe it. I'll do my best. I got up in the middle of the night to nurse the baby, and it was maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. And I went into the baby's nursery and sat down in a rocking chair, and while I was sitting in the rocking chair, I kind of felt wide awake, I guess. And I suddenly started to think about several things at once. I thought about how we pay a lot of money in rent each month. And it's so much money. And I thought about the landlord and immediately pictured him. And then I thought about a pastor that we had gone to a church of his a few times. And then I began to connect those two things. I said, oh, I don't know where we're getting all that money from for that rent. Oh, I know. It's because my husband is a drug dealer. And of course this was completely untrue. This was a delusion that I started to have. And then I started to get all kinds of thoughts about how my husband was a drug dealer. And I just knew that, sitting there in the rocking chair, that he was a drug dealer, methamphetamines, and that his whole family were drug dealers, his mother, his father, and maybe his siblings. And I suddenly knew that his crooked teeth, which he has crooked teeth that need braces, but he's never gotten them. They're quite crooked, actually, with some overlapping teeth. That those were caused by meth use. Even though meth use, of course, doesn't cause crooked teeth, it makes your teeth rot. And his mother had crooked teeth, and she must have used meth too. And then I became afraid because I realized in that moment that my husband was planning on killing me later in the day because I knew too much about something. So I didn't know what to do. So I think I put the baby back in his crib after he fell asleep. I went back to my husband's bedroom. I woke him up and I told him, when were you going to tell me? And he was very confused and he said, tell you what? And I said, that you're a drug dealer. And I said, you're going to kill me later. And he was very tired and confused and he just looked at me and he said, what in the world is the matter, Gabby? He said, you know, what's going on? And I told him more and more insistently, you are a drug dealer, Sam. And he had no idea what I was talking about, and he was so confused, and then he started to get very upset and frustrated. And then I told him that his mom was a drug dealer, and I told him that he was planning on killing me later, and that our landlord was in on it, and our pastor, they were all drug dealers. And he didn't know what to do. And the situation became very intense because I was frightened and agitated and I wasn't going back to sleep. And this psychotic break that I was having was just so unreal. I was 100% convinced that I was right about this. And there was nothing that could convince me otherwise. So later in the morning, when the sun came up around 8 or so, our day was just completely hectic, and Sam decided to take me to his parents with the baby. And maybe his parents could talk sense to them. Maybe when I saw them I would realize that my delusion wasn't true. But it didn't work that way. So we were riding over to the parents to see them, and somehow the delusion shifted and changed in my mind, and now I knew for certain that Sam's parents were dead. I don't know why, and the drug dealer thing seemed to take a back burner. It just changed. I would describe being in that state of psychosis as being in a dream, but also really super aware as well, being detached from reality. Very, very strange, really hard to describe. So we drove to the parents, and I became extremely agitated and frightened when I got there. We parked behind the house, and we usually go in the back door, and I was picturing in my mind them, their bodies laying out, their dead bodies laying in the back of the house, and I knew that's what I would see when I went inside. Well, when I went inside, there were no bodies. The parents were just standing around and doing their normal activities and making food and having some coffee, and Sam's sister was there, and I suddenly knew that I must be dead too, because they were dead. I knew that, so now I knew I was dead, and we were all in some sort of heaven or Narnia type place, something like that. So I remember seeing Sam's sister, my husband's sister, and she looked just kind of fake and artificial, like a robot, like a movie playing, a movie projection, and I knew that she wasn't real. I knew this was all a dream, or we were dead. And she just said hi. She had no idea what was wrong with me. And then Sam's dad just didn't really have much to say at this point, but he became more and more upset as things progressed. I went into the living room, and Sam's mom was sitting on the couch, and I walked up to her with a freaked out look and just went up and touched her face, and she felt solid and real, but then I became confused. I thought, well, she may be alive after all, but I just didn't know, and I was very confused. And then for about an hour or so, we just stayed there, and she called a few people that had some experience with medical things, a nurse and people who might know something, and they didn't know what to do, and one person told her we should be taking me to the hospital, and I had no idea why I would go to the hospital. I just thought, I didn't know what was going on. And while we were there, I acted crazy. I walked around their property. I had a earring up here in my upper ear, and I told my mother-in-law while she was walking out in the property with me that someone was listening through that earring. Someone was spying on us, and they could hear everything. And I did hear. I heard, my hearing was very sensitive, so during that time, which may have been because of having given birth recently, I don't know, or just not getting enough sleep, but it did seem like something was talking to me through the earring. And then a plane went by overhead, and I thought it was coming to gun me down, maybe, or something. And other things that happened was we walked out to the field and looked at the cow, and I don't remember if the cow was in on it. Maybe the cow was a drug dealer too, I don't remember. And then Sam's dad had to go to work, and Sam at that time worked for his dad. He doesn't now, but he had to go to work with his dad, and his dad had customers waiting on him. And I confronted his dad because I thought he was the head of the drug ring, maybe, or something, and I pretty much kidnapped him or postponed him from going to work, and we stood in the barn, and I took his cell phone and looked through his texts, and he was so upset. He was frustrated and upset, and he just said, "Sam, this is crazy. We can't do this." And I thought that their landscaping trucks were filled with meth, and that was underneath the grass, and they were hiding it. And I thought that the reason why Dad was so pressed to get to work was because he had drug customers waiting on him. So that drug dealer delusion started to come back. At this point, Sam was really sad and frustrated and angry, and he didn't know what to do. So finally he said, "Okay, we're going to the hospital." And I didn't want to go to the hospital, but I didn't know. I was completely confused why we would be going to the hospital. I thought that my mom may have been sick in the hospital, but I didn't realize that, I wasn't thinking straight. And my mom lived in another city, and there was a hospital just a mile away from her in her city. Why wouldn't she be in that hospital? But instead she was at the hospital in my town, an hour away from her. And of course my mom was not sick, and she's not been sick at all or in the hospital at any time in the last, really long time. But I thought that we were going to visit her because she was sick, maybe dying. So I got in the car, and we went with the baby and my husband to the hospital. And I thought we were going to go see my mom. We get there, pulled up to the hospital, and I prepared myself to see her sick, maybe with a stroke or something, or a heart attack. And when I got there, I realized we really were there for me. And of course I said to them, "I don't need anything. I don't know why I'm here." And they asked me a few questions, and I started filling out some paperwork, and I said, "There's nothing wrong with me." I said, "There's no history of mental illness in my family," even though that's not completely true. On my father's side, there is some. And I just disregarded the whole thing. And then they started asking me about where billing information and the address, and I, of course, didn't want them to send me a bill, didn't want this to happen, and began to protest, and I don't know how they kept me there. I was just so against it, so belligerent, and the baby was still there, and I thought I was going home with the baby that day, or in a few minutes. So they took me back to a room to wait, and I didn't realize what was going to happen at all. I was completely caught off guard. I was saying absolutely crazy things, like telling a police officer who had nothing to do with any of this, just yelling at him randomly, "My husband is a drug dealer and you have the wrong person. It's not me you need to arrest, it's him." And he looked at me and just said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And that kind of freaked me out, and I stopped yelling at him. He had no idea what I was talking about. And it may have helped me to realize, well, okay, I don't really know what's going on, but apparently he doesn't know. He's not in on this big thing anyway. Then they checked my urine, I think, to see if I had drugs, and of course I had none. And this whole incident was not caused by alcohol or drugs. I had none of those in my system. I've never done drugs, and I don't drink very heavily or very often. And now I don't drink at all. But anyway, I was yelling crazy things and telling the staff that my husband was a drug dealer and that I needed to be protected. And then a doctor came in to check on me. And finally they said they were going to take me up to the 5th floor of the psychiatric ward. And this was the most horrible thing. My little 4-month-old baby, who was still nursing and had never had a bottle, was taken. Sam had to take him from me, and my mother-in-law, father-in-law were there. They had showed up at the hospital. And they saw the most horrible thing, Sam taking the baby from me, and I was screaming and screaming and screaming and crying, and it was just the most intense grief and anger and fear. I could not believe that my baby was being taken from me, and I didn't know when I would see him again. It was so horrifying. My father-in-law told me later that he thought I would be locked up for the rest of my life and I would never see them again, or the baby. And I think that this event made him cry. I think someone told me that, and it was just so terribly sad. And my husband was crying later when he was waiting for me at the hospital, and he was alone at home, and he had a picture of that on his phone, and I saw it later, and it was the most sad and just the saddest thing I've ever seen. He's not really a crying kind of guy at all, and it was so sad. He just looked so broken, so heartbroken, and desperate. So I was taken up in a wheelchair to the 5th floor, and then they shut the doors, and I'm in this secure floor, and they take me back in this little tiny office, and they start asking questions, and they give me a hospital gown, and my possessions, my shoes, and my clothes are taken away, and my cell phone, of course, I don't remember if I even had it with me, and then I'm brought to my own room, and there was this little locked part of the hospital that was locked with 2 doors on both ends of the hall, and only 2 rooms, so it was a very secluded part, and then you could see the nursing station through the glass. And this was horrible. They put me here first, and it was so secluded and horrifying, and they had a nurse up there. She was a recreational nurse, and she was, I forget what she was doing, putting me in my room or something, and I realized this might be the last time I saw a person for a while because they were locking me up, so I was desperate, so I put my arms around her throat, started to strangle her, put my arms around her throat, and started to strangle her, and she blew a whistle, I think, and paged, or, well, did she blow a whistle? I don't know, but she paged someone with her pager and said that she needed security, and they sent a police officer and a sheriff's deputy, a really young guy, and an older guy up there, and then they started putting shots of Haldol, injecting them in me, and I didn't know what it was. I had never heard of it. I just wasn't used to hospitals at all, and I thought it was Haldol. I didn't know. They didn't tell me what it was. They just shot me with it. I only found out later when I read the bills. I thought they were lethal injections. I thought they were putting me down like a dog at a vet clinic because I had attempted murder. I thought they were killing me now in return. And it was the most horrifying thing, blacking out with this horrible, horrible drug and this unnatural sleep. It was so horrible. So, that was a terrible night, the first night, and the male police officer and the young male officer deputy or something were watching when they removed all my clothes on the lower half of my body, made me naked there, and shot the alcohol into my rear end. So I felt as though that was an extreme violation of my dignity, and I feel like there's something that I would like to do to that hospital, and that, I would like to file complaints and things, and I don't know if that's even a legitimate complaint, but it was undignified and horrifying. So at some point later, I think I was extremely frightened, and I think the Haldol had kicked in. I don't know if this was the same night, but anyway, at one point I was holding the hand of an old police officer who had a white beard, and I asked him if he was God. I was completely out of my mind. I don't know what he must have been thinking, and it's just so embarrassing. And I was holding his hand because I was so scared, and I don't know if that was breaking some kind of policy, but then I really was just so scared that it was something I was grateful to be able to do. So, the next day I probably woke out of the drugged sleep, and I don't know at what point this happened, but while I was still in that secluded room, I heard noises and saw a shadow coming from the room next to me. And I thought maybe I remember thinking that they had put like a projector box or something, or some kind of fake person in there, like were tricking me into thinking there was a person. So I went into the room to see what was in there, and it was a real patient, another psych patient, and I, how the hospital kind of amplifies noise and echoes. She was moaning and like calling out, and that's the noise I had heard. She was really scared. She was pregnant, and she was a black woman. She had been picking at her fingernails and her toenails a lot, and I thought she had leprosy because the toenails were kind of peeling, and I thought I would get leprosy if I touched her. It's all so crazy. And I sat with her and talked to her, and she asked me, does having a baby hurt? And somehow, when she asked me this, I just kind of came out of this crazy, mode and just went back into reality and told her, yes, it hurts, but you'll be okay, and you'll be fine, and they'll help you. And, I think it was her first baby, of course, or otherwise she wouldn't be asking me, and I touched her and held her hand, and that was very comforting. I found out later in the little hospital guidebook that it's against policy to go into patients' rooms, but if I hadn't done that, I feel like I would have been very more scared than I was, because I thought there was some kind of monster in the room, and I realized there wasn't. It was a person. But at one point I did think we were both dead and in heaven. So the next day, doctor, psychiatrist came in, talked to me, and I became very upset and missed my baby. And because I was still nursing him, I had milk letdown. So eventually they gave me a breast pump so that I could pump milk and I wouldn't be too engorged and uncomfortable. And I thought that the baby could still use the milk because he had never had a bottle, so I was sending it downstairs to the hospital for my relatives to pick up and give to him, but I don't think he ever had any of that milk. And they told me I probably shouldn't give it to him because there may be some of the drug they were giving me in the milk. So anyway, the psychiatrists and the social workers would come in and talk to me, and for the first couple of days or hours, I would just cry every time someone came in. I would cry uncontrollably, just sob and just wail and say my baby's name, Vernon, and and just sobbed, Vernon, Vernon, where's Vernon? I want Vernon. I wanted to hold him. It was just such an intense need I had. I wanted to hold him so bad. I just had never experienced so much pain and trauma in my entire life than when I couldn't hold my baby when I wanted to. And then an attorney came in to talk to me because there was going to be a trial. That's how involuntary hospitalizations work. Oh, I forgot to mention that when I was downstairs before they brought me up, they had me sign this paper that meant they were going to involuntarily detain me at the hospital for a 72-hour psychiatric hold. And I was forced to sign the paper. Of course, it was against my will. I didn't want to stay. In hindsight, it's probably a good thing that I did. But it was something that was completely against my will. The drugging was forced. All of it was forced. And I was so horrified and traumatized. So the attorney came in, and I was crying. And he said I needed to talk to him so that he could help get me out. And the psychiatrist talked to me, and I was still having a lot of delusions. I thought that the nurses were angels. A lot of them were dressed in blue, and they were very pretty, and some of them had really nice voices, and I thought they were angels. I thought we were in heaven. I thought the attorney was kind of brown skinned and may have been Jesus, or I don't know, one of the prophets or something. You know, I was having all these religious delusions. And then I started to write things down on the papers they were giving me, and I tried to keep track of the days. So today, June 17th, is when I filmed this video, although you'll see it later. I'm not sure exactly when, because I'm not going to release it until I'm ready. But June 17th today is exactly 4 years since this happened, and I am more removed and detached from it now, but it is horrifying to imagine it happening. So nothing like this, of course, has happened since, and probably never will again, but it's just so horrifying that it did. So, and they took me out of that secluded place, and I'm going to have to do a part 2 because I'm running out of time. They took me out of the secluded place and brought me into a larger room, and there was more space there, and it wasn't as secluded. So I'm going to tell you what happened, the rest of it, in part 2 of my psychosis and involuntary hospitalization. Thanks for watching.